My name is Swapnil, or Swap, and I've been fortunate enough to be involved with SCP now for a couple of years, and I'm really grateful for what SCP does and the way that it's able to bring people together like this, in kind of in a practice of leading with compassion and leading with the heart and leading with things that feel so good and natural to us, whereas I, for one, in my day to day, don't have so many opportunities to be in an environment that's so conducive. So I really appreciate these possibilities. Um, Sitaram asked me to speak today, well, for many reasons, I'm sure. All most good, I hope. Some probably not so good. But primarily, it's in part to do with my history with certain psychedelics and with certain extensive practices in relationship with methods of experiencing and being within non-ordinary states of consciousness. It's uh it's something like many of us brought us into the spiritual path, uh, brought me into the spiritual path, and I followed quite extensively for a while and studied, and I hope that by sharing my experience, we can relate our own experience to it, and it can bring about some personal reflections as well. So my personal story is I was born into a Hindu family. My parents are both Indian Hindu, uh, but they weren't necessarily practicing in a traditional way. I was born outside of India, so I was born in Thailand, and I moved around Europe when I was a kid. So there was always a modified version of these practices being practiced in my home. And um, as a kid and throughout my entire childhood, I pushed away the whole thing because, other than Thailand, I grew up in primarily Caucasian communities where I was frequently the only person of color there. And I had enough of a time trying to fit in, and I basically told my parents I don't need flying monkeys around the house when my friends come to visit. That changed, but in those days that was the case. So as I kind of went about life, I had a somewhat ordinary childhood and an ordinary young person personality. I like to party a lot. I like to take fun drugs, and I like to smoke, and I like to drink, and I like to do these things. And what I also very much so had was a really firm view of reality. Of I was sure what life was, and it was what you could see, it was what you could touch, it was what you could prove. And the people that were on the outskirts of this set of reality weren't people that I was interested in interacting with. I remember at one point my father, who was not still today not a very spiritual man, he was reading the book The Power of Now, and boy did I make fun of the poor man. I poked fun at him quite a bit for reading that. And then one day, it was in July of 2013. I was sitting around a fire with some of my friends in my hometown, and we were just smoking cannabis, and that too, just a little bit. It wasn't much going on. And one of my friends, I saw him looking up like this, totally silent, and I looked up to see what he was looking at. And what I saw, in my personal experience, was a green glowing ball in the sky with a red dot in front of it that silently kind of went from one side of the horizon to the other side of the horizon. And I stood up to watch it go. It was probably around a 10-second experience. And I sat back down, and there was five of us around the fire, and no one said a word for probably 3 or 4 minutes. And the it was after about that time that I broke the silence, and the only words that I could say, excuse my language, was, "What the fuck was that?" And then we were thinking, what could that have been? What could this have been? Whatever. And conversation moved on because in hindsight, we really didn't have any capacity to grasp what was happening. I went home and barged into my parents' room where they were sleeping and say, "Mom, Dad, I just saw a UFO." And they said, "Okay, Swap, go back to sleep." And I did go back to sleep, and it was kind of on my mind in the next day. But what I'd found, and more in hindsight, I found this at the time. I didn't really know how I was experiencing and processing this, but in hindsight, I had a choice of whether I wanted to expand my reality to allow for the possibility of that experience, something that before that moment wasn't possible, or if I wanted to reject my own experience to keep my version of reality intact. So, what I chose was the latter. I subconsciously rejected the reality of something that I had personally experienced so that I could keep my own version of the world comfortable. And it worked. I basically forgot about it. It would come up over and over, but it wasn't intrusive or it wasn't anything that was overwhelming. Um, until about 4 or 5 months later, I was on a work trip where I was in China, and all the fun websites were blocked. At that time, Google wasn't blocked, so Google was the most fun that I could have on the internet. So then what I started searching was the date and place of unusual sightings in the sky. And I found that there was all kinds of reports of people seeing the same things, similar things, far out things right around the same time. And at that point, when I felt that there was other people validating this experience, because the friends that I was there with, interestingly, there was five of us, only four of us saw anything. And out of the three others, we were all kind of in a similar boat, not knowing how to navigate it. So when there was other people that were kind of full blown, yes, I saw all of this. Um, it was it started the process of me actually naturally letting go of these walls that were keeping my reality so comfortable. And then I went into a really deep rabbit hole of kind of technology and all these things that are flying around. And but what happened is I kept hitting a pretty significant wall with this research in the rabbit hole. And this wall that I was hitting was kind of explicitly saying sometimes through what I was reading, or implicitly based on my feeling, was that if I really want to research and understand these phenomenon, the kind of connecting tissue of all of it is consciousness. So if I want to understand what's going on in this sense, then it makes sense for me to study my own consciousness. Okay. And that wasn't really a concept that I had entertained before. And I also didn't really know how, but I knew that meditation was a practice and it was kind of readily available and sort of easy to find resources on. So I started doing some guided meditations on YouTube. Within 2 weeks, something like 2 or 3 weeks, I felt a radical shift in my personality where I felt much more calm, much more quiet and peaceful. And and my friends definitely noticed because I was always the person that had to have way too much attention in every social setting, and they thought that something was going really south and something was really wrong with me all of a sudden, that I didn't want to have all this attention. But what was happening is I was having these changes in my personality. And then I wanted to explore more on these things that I was experiencing. So then what I did was I someone was talking to me about psilocybin, about different psychedelics, which before this point I was kind of reluctant to experience. But after having had these experiences, I thought it was a good and safe way to explore. So then I started exploring with psilocybin, and it was a very potent opening for me and potent exploration. But one of the most potent times with psilocybin was when I felt like I had an experience um, with the spirit of the plant that said to me, uh, basically, stop with this. You're going to find your teachings elsewhere. And the a couple days after that, I listened to a podcast with some friends, and it led me to ayahuasca, which I had never heard of. But as soon as I heard about it for the first time, it felt like it was a thing that I've been waiting to hear about for my whole life. So I went to drink ayahuasca in Peru with a curandero named Arnaldo. I went to a retreat center and kind of did the whole thing. And when I went there, drinking ayahuasca for me was kind of a complete range of experience, starting from the low, the demonic, the horrendous of experiencing pain and suffering that I had within me or that I had caused or that was in the world, all the way to feeling complete divine unitive consciousness and merging with all beings and all things in the whole universe and in a limitless loving way and and everything in between. But what turned out to be one of the most significant things in that experience was I felt really drawn to what it was that this curandero was doing and his songs. I've been a musician for my whole life and played piano since I was a kid, but I never heard music like this man was playing. And all his instrument was a bunch of leaves on a stick, and it was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard in my life. I felt really interested, and I felt in one particular moment that, wow, I think I could really help people if I learned what he was doing. And the morning after I had that thought, he came to me and he said, through a translator, because at the time I didn't speak Spanish, he said that his spirit guides say that you could really help people if you learned what it is that I'm doing. So he almost used the same words and extended an invitation to me if I'd like to study what um, is the lineage. So I had my own plans of what life was going to be. So I told him I'd think about it, and I went home and I didn't think about anything else. And I said yes, and then I went and started a formal apprenticeship under the umbrella of the lineage of La Ciencia Blanca in Peru in 2015. Yeah, in 2015. And basically got initiated into this profound lineage that has been passed on through generations. And uh, the very first step of this was that you drink a lot of ayahuasca. So when I say lot, I mean probably 3 to 4 times a week for about 3 or 4 months straight is like step one. And that you're reading the literature, you're consuming the material available to learn about what there's to learn about. And I did the whole thing. I drank a lot of ayahuasca. I learned the healing modalities. I learned the songs. I learned how to carry ceremonies. I learned how to heal patients outside of ceremony, and I earned various titles in the local community. But at the same time, I felt like this world around me was so complete and invested the in the fullness of the medicine world or the psychedelic world. But I couldn't help but feel that it wasn't full, that there was a lot that was untouched, or there was a lot that was left unnoticed or unaddressed. And primarily, I was feeling those things in myself. And um, like I would have profound experiences of love and compassion, but then sometimes I would be a dick the next day, and I I would see myself do that, and I say, wait, didn't I just hang out with God for 2 hours? How come I have these same behaviors that I had 2 years ago? And this kind of kept happening to the point where, I mean, I would drink ayahuasca hoping to have progress and all that, but I didn't. I didn't have much in personal progress. And I started to find that where I was having progress was in situations that were so far from the shamanic ceremony, for example. Like I remember I had a beautiful experience while sitting in on a meeting with my dad's business. And I remember this like subtle flip of consciousness of seeing this girl there that was the sales manager, about just recognizing for a moment her as the Divine Mother. And it stuck with me so profoundly because I hadn't taken anything. I wasn't even trying to do anything. But it was an experience that still, if I remember it today, I can make that tiny flip and I can see all the women here as the Divine Mother. So it became such a beautiful teaching for me. And I started to feel the transformative effects of life rather than always chasing the transformative effect of a substance or a practice. And I'm talking about ayahuasca here extensively because it's my primary, um, an easy way for me to tell stories. But kind of thrown in there, I did do a lot of other practices as well. I was fairly heavily invested into pranayama, into different kinds of yoga, into chanting and meditations, and they all they all served a profound purpose for me. And sooner or later, I also felt that the looser that I held on to any one of these, or the more fluid rather I was, like if I let pranayama go today and then hold on to meditation, or if I don't worry about meditating and I just sing, or if I don't sing and I just be in life, the more that I could fluidly be with these things, the more harmonious my relationship became with these altered states. Rather than trying to collect these states or run to these states for any kind of experience that I thought was going to benefit me for a certain purpose, I felt like these states were like these wise friends that I had, that when I would hang out with them, they would, in a subtle way, remind me just a little bit more of who I am. And these states that I'm talking about, they're the whole spectrum. You know, we're talking about the state that Sitaram guided us into, about feeling this loving being and then feeling that this loving being is inside of us. That if we compare that, and if we're able to, which is a fun practice for me sometimes, of seeing and remembering that state, and remembering maybe a state we were in earlier today where we were not in any kind of state like that, and feel how radically different they are. Where normally we go gradually into it, so we don't really tell, and we're like, oh yeah, we're always like this. I'm always loving and peaceful. Whereas like if I just think about how I was being so unfair to my wife like 2 hours ago, and why I couldn't have been that loving. And from that range of experience all the way to the kind of miraculous samadhi experience, or the interconnection with all life and that really vast expanse. What we're talking about is kind of everything in that realm, but with the grounding concept that there are benefits and pitfalls to these experiences, and there are ways that we can kind of navigate these experiences and these topics in a way that can be personal, it can be genuine, and it can be a grounded experience for our own genuine growth.